And hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of RippleLIVE. This is actually episode number 27 in an ongoing series. I'm Mark, and next to me is Steve. How you doing, Steve?
Great. Good to not see you, Mark.
Yeah, I mean, next to me virtually,
Next to it,
of course. I'm in outside San Francisco, and Steve's in Arizona. But we are together today, and we're here to answer your questions about Final Cut Pro, motion, and related questions. So what we're going to do is we have some questions that folks have submitted over the past week to kind of give us a starting point. And we've looked over those and chosen some ones, and we're going to go use those as our starting point. But we also have a chat window that you can ask questions during the show, and Steve will explain exactly how that works.
Yeah, so you could put in the chat whatever questions you want. And we also have a super chat. There's a little icon if you want to donate to the show, and whatever you feel like giving supports our efforts to continually bring you awesome Final Cut motion and post content. We'll get to the super chat questions first. The ones that will just pop up in a colored box, and we'll answer those first. And put your question in there. And if we miss it, it's not because we're ignoring you. It's just that we'll get a lot of questions, and the question in the stream will just pop up, and we'll just miss it. So just post it again. It's not intentional. We're just doing our best to do that. We actually submitted a survey to our email list, and we have a number of questions that have kind of been pre-baked. So a lot of our demos will be based on the questions that were submitted ahead of time. So we're going to be answering those, and we're going to be answering the ones in the chat. So as I'm demoing, I'll be monitoring the chat, and Mark's demoing, he'll be monitoring the chat. So the idea is we'll try to keep, try to keep all these plates spinning, as it were, for the show. Okay.
Just real quickly, in terms of if you're planning for your time, the show is at a minimum an hour. We'll do an hour. If there's still a lot of questions to get through, we'll push beyond that for a while more. Just so, if you didn't get your question answered and it's hitting the hour mark, we'll do the best we can to answer as many questions as possible.
Yep. So I think we should just get right into it. We have over 50 questions that were submitted ahead of time, and some of them are short, some of them are longer. So the show will be kind of a mix between shorter answers and kind of longer answers that we'll deal with directly using the interface. And we'll actually walk you through some stuff. Sound good? Sounds good. All right. So what I want to do is start out with a question about the ATEM and Final Cut Pro. So, hi guys, I finally cracked open my ATEM Mini ISO, and it's awesome. And he wants, until I have time to dig into DaVinci Resolve, is there a good way to work with ATEM Mini ISO files in Final Cut Pro 10 with the built-in ATEM transitions? Okay, so let me answer that question, how to deal with the ATEM ISO. And by the way, I should clarify what he means by ATEM ISO. I thought about bringing my ATEM up here, but Blackmagic makes a little box that's essentially a switcher, and they have 3 models. And the one he's referring to is the ISO, which means that if you have multiple inputs, like if you have 3 camera inputs, the ATEM ISO will record individual streams of every input, and allows you to essentially do a multicam edit with those full individual ISO streams. So that's if you're going to get an ATEM Mini at all, that's the one we'd recommend, just because it creates those individual camera files. So let me show you what. Let me just show you what happens inside DaVinci Resolve, so you can see. So here I am in Resolve, and normally what you would do is you would capture the ATEM, and the ATEM would create a DaVinci Resolve project file, and it would essentially bring in camera 1, camera 2, camera 3 as separate camera angles. And then what you then would do is use the cut page to actually lay out your cuts. You can see in this case, there's ISO of my friend Curtis, from different angles playing one of his songs that he composed. But here's the thing, the cut page does not translate directly to Final Cut. And as you can see here, these are essentially clips cut on top of an audio clip, or basically the master audio file, the recorded audio. So the way Resolve deals with multicam is it's not a true multicam edit. It's basically cut the angles, one after the other in the timeline. So And I even tested it. There's really no way to turn this into a multicam clip and then bring it into Final Cut. So really what you can then do is bring the individual ISO files into Final Cut like I did here. You can see I have my 4 cameras, and then I made a multicam clip called Curtis, and I sunk them up using the traditional method that you would sync cameras in Final Cut, and then I just cut to them. So the ATEM Mini ISO is a great tool. You don't have to use Resolve. You just take those ISO files and bring them into Final Cut and sync them up, and it works great. So I did want to answer that question because a lot of you do use the ATEM for your your Zoom calls, your Skype calls, and what have you. So it works great. All right, so I'm going to jump over to the next question in the list, and this has to do with audio. It says, hi guys, I normalize, EQ, compress, and limit to -3 dB and mono dialogue in Adobe Audition's waveform editor. After I bring the file into Final Cut Pro, the level is much lower, around -10. Why? Even if I originally recorded a level, it's always much lower in the volume into when I bring it into Final Cut Pro. So let's walk through that workflow for a moment. Okay, so here's Adobe Audition, and by the way, this could be Audition, this could be Fairlight, it could be any audio editor. And what I did is I walked through his exact steps. I took a file, I normalized it to -3 dB. It was a stereo file, I turned it into a mono file, pretty much did everything that he was doing in Audition, and then I spit it out I exported it out as an AIF file. Now back in Final Cut Pro, let me jump in here for a moment and go into Audition. Here is the file that was exported from Audition, and I want you to see this. I'm going to play this back and watch the audio meters in the lower corner.
When creating motion graphics, I often like to work with hand-drawn artwork.
Okay, notice, you know what, I left out a step. Let me jump back to Audition. If I play this, notice the view meters in Audition are actually sideways.
When creating motion graphics, I often like to work with hand-drawn artwork. This particular image is in the JPEG.
So they're peaking at about -6 and averaging around -12. And then that same file in Final Cut, when you play it from the browser,
when creating motion graphics, I often like to work with hand-drawn artwork.
Is the exact same level. So the first thing I want to say is that Final Cut isn't doing anything to the audio file. It's coming in exactly the way it was spit out from Audition or whatever audio editor you're working with. Now here's where things get a little tricky. I'm going to open this project. Now actually I'm going to start from scratch. I'm going to actually add this audio file to the timeline. Okay, now this is what he was referring to. Watch what happens when I play this audio file. Watch the meters.
When creating motion graphics, I often like to work with hand-drawn artwork. This particular image is in the JPEG.
So you can definitely see in the meters that it's at least 6 dB lower than when I played it in the browser. So what's going on and how do I deal with it? Well, a lot of people don't really understand that Final Cut Pro actually mixes its audio in a surround space. So it's dealing with center, left, rear, left, right, and it's doing its best to take that mono file and then distribute it through the surround space. And when it does that, it actually reduces the level -6 dB to account for the other channels. A lot of people don't understand that. So when I go into the audio config section here, notice it says that it came in as mono, right? But if you go into the pan settings, the mode, if you go to create space, this is the one, basically what that does is it brings up the audio panner. And what it'll do is it will then take every channel and map it to 100%. So now when I play this, watch the meters now.
When creating motion graphics, I often like to work with hand-drawn artwork. This particular image is in the JPEG format, which limits how far I'll...
So it's exactly the way it was sent from, well, the way it appeared in Adobe Audition. I just had to take the additional step of saying, all right, put it in this surround space, and then what Final Cut Pro 10, Final Cut Pro is doing is it's then maximizing the level to that stereo field. So now you're getting the full bandwidth of that stereo field. So again, it's a little bit of gotcha if you don't know what's going on, but it's what Final Cut Pro is doing to the file once it gets inside of its internal audio environment. So, that's my answer. Travis is going, what the heck?
I did not know that.
What do you think, Mark? Did you know that?
No, that's very interesting. Hey, I just wanted to mention, so I've been trying to answer some of the questions in line in the chat as best as possible.
Yeah.
I just wanted to call out and give thanks to Mike Thomas for your contribution. He says, are you aware of a trackable cloning tool that supports polygons? I texted him here, but our own plugin, Ripple Tools Complete, includes a trackable cloning tool that it's not like triangles and octagons, but you can do any kind of circle or rectangle or square or rounded object between. It's actually just been recently updated to do all of those different options. So if your version isn't just run FX Factory, it'll update and you should be able to do that. And I also wanted to call up Philip McDonald, who's just made a contribution to make a contribution. So thank you, Philip, and great to see you as well. Tom Olsky says, I'm a little out of sync. I guess he means my audio versus video. If other people see that, chime in. I do have my audio and video both going straight through my camera through HDMI to the ATEM, so they should be in sync. And then Steve, why don't you jump to the next?
It might be a Skype issue, Mark. Honestly. So
yeah,
I don't know.
Okay.
So I was going to do a compressor tutorial. What I want to do is I'm going to just flag that in red and circle back to it because that one will take a little explanation. I want to get to some of the shorter questions first. So what I'm going to do.
By the way, I think it's really funny that this is a Final Cut Pro and Motion Tip show, and we started off with Resolve and Adobe Audition.
Well, the reality is that people don't just use one tool.
I know. It's just funny.
Yeah, it is. So let's look at some of these questions relative to Final Cut that we can answer fairly short order. Hi, is there a way of getting a clip on the secondary timeline to snap to the playhead using a keyboard shortcut? Mark, you were going to show that, or no, or were you just going to talk about that? I can't remember.
No. The only thing is that there's no keyboard shortcut to make a clip on the secondary storyline snap to the playhead. Now, you can make the playhead snap to the clip on the secondary storyline as long as snapping is enabled. But if we take that question literally, that you have a clip on the secondary storyline and you want it to move over to your current playhead location, you need to drag it. There's no keyboard shortcut to do that.
Awesome. Thanks, Mark. Next question. What would be the reason for anyone to learn Final Cut in Motion considering Resolve is available for free for both Mac and PC? Man, we get this question almost every single time, and basically it amounts to what software we prefer working in. Both Mark and I love editing in Final Cut because it's just so fast with its metadata tools, the tagging, the ranging, the keyword ranging. There's nothing like it. So we use Final Cut as our main editor, and that's what we use. The other reason to learn Final Cut /Motion is that think about the plugin universe out there. I mean, with Motion, you can make all these plugins. There's literally thousands of plugins out there on the market right now, all created for Final Cut. I love Resolve, but there's just not that, what I call aftermarket for all these plugins, and it's because of Motion. So yeah, I totally believe you should be learning Final Cut Motion. I mean, you can use Resolve, and we do, but I don't know. We just like the cohesion between Final Cut and Motion is so good. In fact, there's so many plugins. That's why we use it. So I don't know. Mark had anything to say about that?
No. Final Cut is an amazingly fast editor. Yeah. It's just once you get over the hump of understanding the basics of working with its paradigm, I don't think there's any faster way to edit. So that's my 2 cents.
All right. Next question. The last 2 updates of Final Cut Motion have been lacking when compared to Resolve. Do you expect a brand new product like FCP 11 in the next 6 months? If so, do you think Motion Final Cut will be fully integrated into one editing compositing system? This is a big talking right now with subscription leaks and so forth. Please share your thoughts rather than saying we don't know. I don't know. Do you want to answer that one, Mark? Or not answer it?
Well, no, but I'll give 2 comments on that. One is Final Cut and Motion were completely rewritten for Metal. And I recognized there weren't a lot of feature enhancements that went into that new release, but it was a complete rebuild from the bottom up. So people don't always understand, if you're just looking for features, what's happening when an update comes out. It doesn't seem to do anything. But you run Final Cut on an M1 Mac, even these little Mac Minis or the MacBook Air, and it's the shocking performance that people are seeing from that is because these apps have been completely rewritten from the ground up. So in my mind, you can't compare them to what other apps are doing. They're setting a new framework and a groundwork to build upon. So I'm just super excited for what we see coming up. In terms of what we do see coming up, we don't know. And the standard is if somebody says, if somebody knows, they can't tell you. And if somebody can tell you, they don't know. So that's just the way Apple works. They don't, they don't put betas out. They don't communicate what they're working on. We all find out together.
Excellent. Way better than I would have answered that question, Mark. That's great.
I doubt
All
it.
right. Yeah. So let's move on to the next question. There's a question here about, it says trivia. What determines the length of video clips? Your camera, your video editing software, or length of recording time? I don't fully understand the question, but I'll do my best to answer it. Well, your camera always determines the length of your clip. It's that's what you're recording on when you press record and you press stop, it records until you press stop. And if that's an hour, you get an hour clip. That's why I don't understand. But that said, when you import it, what determines the length of the clip is what you decide. You can say, I want to pick this much of it using a range, or you can bring in the whole clip. And some cameras actually break clips into like 4 gigabyte chunks because, well, like certain cameras, Canon cameras will break it into pieces, and then you have to span them together. So there's that spanning issue, but you're still dealing with the full length of your recording, whether it's one clip or 2 clips. All right, awesome. All right, let's answer some plugin questions before we jump back to some demos.
Let's see. Sure. So let's see. One person says, I've noticed with Big Sur, I get many red screens with a yellow triangle and an exclamation point on effects, titles, generators, etc. in the browser. Is this because those companies like C2, TrackX, and others have not yet upgraded their plugins? Sometimes I scroll across one, it will crash Final Cut. So I've been on Big Sur for months now, as is Steve, and I'm running all my plugins without a problem. And I don't know specifically with the Core Melt ones. You can Core Melt is Jim Turney, Digital Anarchy, and they're great plugins, and they'll answer. You go to their website, you'll find out if they're updated for Big Sur or not. So I can't address those directly. I can tell you for all of our RippleLIVE plugins, our T plugins, they all work, and all of our FX Factory plugins work on Big Sur. So they've all been tested and work just fine. Big Sur isn't the issue as much as the M1 Macs are, and actually that has now, as of the past couple of weeks, become less of an issue. For instance, FX Factory has now been able to release, with the new version of Final Cut 10.5.2, plugin developers are now able to release plugins that depend on the FX plug architecture that will now work on M1 Macs. So we've done that with our FX Factory plugins that have tracking, Ripple Tools Complete and Ripple Callouts Complete. Those work on M1 Macs, on Big Sur, on Catalina, it doesn't matter. You just need to update the FX Factory application to the most recent version directly from their website. So hopefully that answers that. Let's see. The next question is, I really like my Final Cut. I'm sorry, go ahead, Steve.
No, I was going to say, they've got a couple of super chats. Mike Thomas, thanks for that. Philip McDonald, thank you. And yeah, we're glad to be doing this. It's sometimes challenging to get these scheduled in our schedule, these RippleLIVEs. Thanks, Todd. Thanks, Sean. Really appreciate it. Thanks for the shout out there. Really appreciate it. And Greg Stoller, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Okay, back to you, Mark.
Sure. So this person says, I really like my FCP effects folder structure in Final Cut Pro in the titles, generators, or effects browsers. Only the title My FCP Effects appears in the list once you select the title All My Effects Reveal For non-managed, I think I know what he's saying. Let me just finish the question. For non-managed effects, non-FX Factory, can you move a developer's plugins to a folder structure like the FCP effects, like our plugins that are not the FX Factory, results in a cleaner browser and easier navigation? So basically what this person is saying, he or she is saying, is that you look in the titles browser and every developer, every plugin is all listed in a long, long list there if you have a lot of them. The answer is for non-FX Factory plugins, because FX Factory kind of manages those, you could certainly put those into a folder structure within your home, movies, motion, templates folder within titles. You have to keep it within titles, transitions, effects, or generators. But within that, you could create a master folder called, all of my whatever plugins, and put each of those developers' plugins in those. And that way it would reduce the number of categories you would have, for instance, in your titles browser in Final Cut. And then you could, just select that and have them all show up in there. So I believe there's no reason that shouldn't work. It's super easy to test. You just create a folder and drop them in. If it doesn't do what you want, take them back out again. But it should work. So, it's a good question, really, because as we add more and more plugins, there's a lot to go through.
So Rhonda, I asked a question. I would so love a deep dive into all the audio filters of Final Cut. All of them. Does Ripple have a super deep dive on audio? Travis, cut to my screen, please. And this is Travis. By the way, Travis is he's the most awesome technical director that anyone can want. And, he's waiting to, he's going to go home. His wife's about ready to have a baby. So, we're just blessed to have him here for right now. So anyway, the reason I brought Travis up is because he created this great tutorial called Working with Audio Effects. Rhonda, this is exactly what you need.
But it doesn't cover
every plugin. Honestly, Rhonda, you don't need to know every plugin. You really don't. There are ones that are quite silly, like the one that, Alien Voice or whatever. Those speak for themselves. But these are the useful ones. He covered the useful ones that you'll actually use to improve your audio. So check that out. It's on our website. It's called Working with Audio Effects in Final Cut Pro. So appreciate that question. There was another question. There was a question that someone, I'm trying to find it. Greg Stoller asked then what you use Resolve Adobe for. All kinds of stuff, Greg. We use Resolve for doing color grading, the stuff that we can't do in Final Cut. There's no tracker in Final Cut. There's no built-in awesome noise reduction in Final Cut. There's no scene cut detection. I could just make a whole list of things that Final Cut doesn't do that Resolve does do. So we use Resolve all the time. And in terms of Adobe, we don't use Audition because Resolve has Fairlight built into it. So if we need something more sophisticated than Final Cut, I use Final Cut for like 90% of my audio, but Fairlight's there. You could use Audition. And a lot of people have Adobe Creative Cloud. So they just have the subscription because they're using Photoshop and whatnot. So these are just all tools. So we use whatever tool we need to do the job. It's not just one tool that we use. So I hope that answered your question. All right. Okay. I'm just going back to the live questions here.
Yeah. Okay. One more plugin question
Yes.
here. It's similar. I have a ton of third-party plugins.
Right.
How to locate. And by the way, this is just a side comment. I see a lot of people that are new to Final Cut. They get Final Cut and they immediately are posting, where do I get plugins? What plugins should I get?
Yeah.
And my general recommendation on that is first discover what's possible in the software before you go spend a bunch of money on plugins or download a bunch of free plugins.
Yep.
Because Final Cut has a ton of capacity directly in it for color correction, for titles, for transitions. Just, learn what it can do and then, feel free, augment it, get plugins. But I just anyway, a little side comment on that. But this question was, I have a ton of third-party plugins. How do I locate which specific plugin I used a while back? I simply do not recall. The search might show many choices. I have to go one by one to find the name of the company I used from in order to try another effect. And I agree with it. This is a pain in the neck. You open an old project where you used some third-party plugin and it's offline. And you're like, well, what the heck did I use and where can I find it? How can I get it back online? It's a pain in the neck. So what I'm going to recommend to you is I'm going to share my screen here. So this is a website, spherico.com, run by Andreas Kiel, who's a great guy. And he makes a free plugin called XFX Handler. And what this little app, it's not a plugin, it's a little app. What this app does is it tells you, to the extent that it can, the source of plugins that are offline in Final Cut. So it's a great idea. I actually just tested this morning. I can't get it to work on I'm running Big Sur and 10.5.2, and it does not work on that. And I read through this document, it looks like it hasn't been updated in a while. So if you're into that, just communicate with them. Go to the website, spherico.com. You can see it here. And in fact, let me make it, can I make this bigger now? Yeah, there we go. Spherico, film tools, blah, blah, blah. Just go to spherico.com and you can, get his, tell him to update it. Because it's a great tool.
Command him.
Tell him to update it. Yes. Okay.
A couple of questions popped in the chat. We'll back up to Mads Bo Christensen. Do you have a workflow for grading in the DV but editing in Final Cut using Sony A7S3 files? I'm not sure what you mean grading in the DV, but I'm assuming, well, maybe you can get a little bit of clarification. Mark's actually, I don't want to steal your thunder, Mark, but you're going to answer. Yeah. You're going to answer that question later, but unless you want to answer it now.
Well, which question is it? The one from Edward White?
Yeah, but there's a similar question in the post about working with A7S3 files.
Right. So they're actually separate questions. So yeah. Edward, I actually posted below his question. I posted a link to our MacBreak Studio that talks about how to work with camera-generated proxy files.
Right.
So I would just take a look at that because it explains exactly the workflow for doing that. And we can just take that offline that way. And then I'll address the other one when we get there.
There's a question from PWeeks123. Hi guys, when I go to my Logic Pro tab in the browser, always empty. How do I get Final Cut to see my Logic files? It's so funny you asked that. I tested this last night because someone a few weeks ago was saying they couldn't see their GarageBand projects in the GarageBand tab. And I did a test, both in Logic and in GarageBand, and I can't get any projects to show up there anymore at all. So, I mean, you could spit out, you could bounce out an audio file and publish it to Photos or what, I'm not Photos, but I forget what the, publish it to Apple Music, and then it will show up in your browser, but you're not going to get I just don't see the project file. I can't get it to work. So I agree with you. I have no idea what's going on, but it's empty. So it's not you. Okay.
Hey, Steve, now I see the question, and actually I think what that Mads Bo Christensen said, do you have a workflow for grading in the DV? I think they mean in DaVinci Resolve, but right. Editing in Final Cut.
Yes.
And and the workflow isn't specific to A7S3, it's any camera. There's a very straightforward, in theory, process for editing in Final Cut and grading in Resolve, because you can take your Final Cut and export XML. You can bring that XML into Resolve and do your grade there. Personally, what I would recommend is you can then round trip back. You can do either one. And once you're in Resolve, you go to the deliver page after you've done your grade, and you can deliver an FCP XML so that those rendered clips will show up in a new timeline in Final Cut. So that process is simple. However, there are a few gotchas because when you bring your Final Cut Pro XML into DaVinci Resolve, things like titles aren't going to show up. Speed changes. There's certain things you need to be aware of and plan in advance if you're going to do that workflow. So you can either round trip or you can do all your editing in Final Cut, then go to Resolve, do your grade and output from Resolve is another option. And it's a great way to combine the strengths of each app.
Yeah. Awesome. So I would like to maybe jump over and answer some multicam questions that came in. Some of the questions that came in. The first one is, when editing in a multicam clip in the multicam editor, why is it sometimes you can move clip left and right at will, and other times you can only move it by nudging them? So let's see here. Jump over to Final Cut and go into my ATEM cut. And here we are, and I'll jump, this is the multicam edit, and I'm just going to jump into the angle editor. And when you jump into the angle editor, I don't know if you can see this, and I need to get that tool Mark was talking about that puts a ring around the mouse. I was going to do that before the show, and I just forgot. Anyway, but when you come into the angle editor, you have the position tool is the tool that's chosen for you by default. So you can see this is the tool without the, it's not a selection arrow. So you should be able to just grab this and just literally move these clips at will anywhere you want. Now, Mark's point to me earlier was it might be possible that you have the selection tools chosen. And notice when I have the selection tool, it doesn't work. So my guess is, or our guess is, that you switch somehow to the selection tool, and that's why you're not able to move the angle. Okay, the other question related to this, and I don't have a specific demo, so you can come back to me, Travis. I don't have a specific demo, but the question was regarding, how to deal with green screen footage and multicam. I'll read the question. I have a few interview style projects coming up where we'll be using green screen. I plan to use multiple cameras, and is there a way to set the composite for each camera prior to creating a multicam clip so that when I switch angles, the appropriate background switches as well? Yes, this is what you do. You take your each one of your green screen angles, put them in a timeline, get the composite so that it looks really clean for each angle, and then turn each of those timelines into a compound clip. Then take those compound clips and turn those into a multicam clip. And then when you're cutting between the angles, you're actually cutting to the composite of the green screen. And that's it. That's how you do it. So I didn't have any specific demo, but I figured you could probably follow the workflow just from me describing it. Awesome. All right, Mark, back to you.
Great. Yeah, let me just handle a couple of questions that have shown up since then. Movie Temp says, how do you find plugins in the timeline mentioned as missing, offline, etc. when exporting? And so I just had mentioned that XFX handler. If you just watch this again, you can go back and see the answer to that question. And by the way, once we publish this, after we've recorded it today, it will be fully indexed, so you can jump right to specific questions and find the answer if you didn't quite get it here. Tom Olsky makes a good point. He says he has GarageBand projects in Final Cut. They have to be in the music GarageBand folder path, and guessing the same as in Logic. So that's one thing to try, is go into Music, Logic, put them in there. Peter Hitchcock says, can you lock individual shots on the timeline? The colorist has put some shots out of sync. It would be great if they locked with an icon like a padlock. If you mean lock where they are in the timeline, the answer is no, not that I know of. And if you mean lock settings on them, like color correction, etc., the answer is also no. I don't believe so.
I could see the value really of having some sort of a lock tool. I really can.
Yeah, yeah.
What I do,
yes,
if you're trying to keep two things in sync on the timeline, I'll park my playhead and I'll throw a marker on both items, so then you have a quick reference of putting them back in sync. Yeah, that's Travis's little trick. He puts a marker on all of the layers that need. It's like sync points. If they get out of sync, you can really use those markers to get them lined up. But that, in this case, though, he's handing off his project to a colorist, and the colorist is really jacking up the sync of everything, and that would be really frustrating, I got to tell you. But
another quick one. IM says, hi there, I just jumped in. What's the best way to go from 25p to 24p without jitter/artifacts using Final Cut Pro and Compressor? Greetings from Corazo, Dutch Caribbean. Hey, that's where Martin's from. Cool. A friend of ours in Belize. So I don't know if you can address this, Steve, but I think it's very hard to go specifically from 25p to 24p in a clean way, because you've got to drop a frame. I mean, I don't know of a best way to do that. I would guess Compressor would be the best way, but I think you're always going to have some kind of issue.
Yeah. You're right. There's going to be kind of an issue. I mean, the way they do it in the real world in the broadcast is they run it through a Teranex. They run it through a box that will, give you. It's using hardware to, add or subtract the frames at the, the highest possible quality. I don't know if there's a way to do it cleanly. Maybe you guys that do that regularly can, chime in. But, it's a math problem actually. All right. Cool. So Rocco says he says, holy crap, that's exactly the wrong, he was using the wrong tool.
Great.
All right, cool. Let's get back to some of this question. Just want to remind everyone, we're taking your questions, post them there in the chat. There's a super chat icon if you want to donate to the show. Really appreciate it. just as an aside here, we yesterday we hit 80,000 subscribers. So, you know, we're pretty excited about that. You know, people that, you know, I think YouTube's great, but you know, just it's even when you have a lot of content, it's just really challenging to get, you know, it's just a lot more work than we ever thought. Those who want to start, I want to encourage you, do your YouTube channel, but be prepared to be like producing a lot of content. That's all I have to say. And it's like, it's almost a full-time job. So anyway, all that to say, if you're a sub to our channel already, thank you so much. And if you're not a sub, we really appreciate it if you'd sub. Thank you very much. Awesome.
Hey, Steve,
Yes.
can I get into this ProRes RAW question?
Sure, go ahead. Yeah, get to the ProRes RAW.
So yeah, this is actually interesting and very timely. So the question here is, with ProRes RAW editing, is there any real advantage to or difference in quality adjusting white balance and ISO in the inspector as introduced in Final Cut 10.4.9 over using the color correction tools from the timeline? I'm using a Nikon Z67 with Atomos Ninja. From the limited experience I've done, I'm not seeing a benefit in adjusting white balance in the inspector. In fact, it appears to be a lot more control using the color correction tools as highlights can be adjusted independently. Coming from a stills photography background and still relatively new to video, the concept of adjusting ISO in post is strange, and the only real benefit I can see is I can actually see the apparent overexposed raw video a lot better in the browser by using low ISO. Any insight, much appreciated. So let me share my Final Cut screen here. Steve, can you see it?
Yep, I can.
Great. So this is timely because I'm actually working on a kind of a MacBreak Studio extended episode specifically on ProRes RAW workflow, on how to set up to shoot it, you know, the pre-production, what you do on set if you're shooting ProRes RAW, and how you work with it in Final Cut. So if you're interested in that topic, stay tuned. Hopefully it will be out next week. I was just in Belize and Guatemala on a shoot, and I did a bunch of ProRes work. And let me just answer that specific question. So in my timeline here, my playhead is parked over a ProRes RAW clip shot from the A7S III into the Ninja 5. You can tell it's a ProRes RAW clip because, well, if you go to the general tab here, it'll tell you that it is if you go to the basic tab, it'll show you right here in codecs that it's a ProRes RAW clip right here. And if you then go to the general or extended tab, you can see the camera ISO and the camera color temperature, as well as something here called raw to log conversion and camera light. Now, they're not adjustable here. And you might think, oh, what he's talking about, not adjustable. It's a little bit of a trick. You need to go to the Settings tab instead. And there you will find, at least with the A7S III, ISO is adjustable with your raw footage. Currently, camera color temperature is not. I hope that will change in a future firmware update, but at least you can adjust ISO. So the question was, like, why should I bother adjusting ISO here? Let me make things a little bit bigger when you know, I can just do color correction. And the fact is, when you're adjusting ISO here, it's like you're doing it on set. You're working with the raw captured image data, and you're not damaging that data in any way by making an ISO change. So in this case, this shot was a little bit underexposed, so I could bump ISO up and basically get kind of a better starting point. So if you're making ISO and camera color temperature adjustments to your raw footage, you're not doing it as a grading process. You're doing it in order to normalize the clip, and you're using the direct raw data captured from the camera, so it's not having any negative impact to the pixels. As soon as you start any kind of color correcting and you're stretching out values, you're starting to actually introduce the possibility of creating issues around banding and other kind of issues because you're manipulating the pixels that have now been locked in by your ISO and white balance settings right here. So these are super useful to be able to adjust after the fact if you didn't quite get it right. I wouldn't use them to do, you know, really dramatic differences, but you can, and it's going to do the best possible job of making adjustments to your footage. It's literally like saying, oh, when I was on set, I really should have used a higher or lower ISO, or I should have used a different color temperature. Unfortunately, I can't change that temperature right here, but hopefully we'll be able to. So it's definitely a different process than going to the color tab and then like if I put on the color board and I can start doing a grade on here. It's best to start with a shot that you've set up with the correct ISO and white balance in advance. And that's one of the really big benefits of working with raw footage.
So Heiner Brenson asks, I use Logic's remove silence function for voiceover. Did you know there's a remove silence function in Logic there, Travis? I'm going to have to play with that. Didn't even know that.
Remove silence.
It says, well, he says I use Logic's remove silence function for voiceover, but the XML the export creates one audio file. The AAF export doesn't do that. But Final Cut doesn't take AAF. How do you strip silence yourself? How do you silence yourselves? Well, if you want to cut back to my UI there, Trav, there's a couple of ways we do it. One of the ways that's fast is to throw on a noise gate. So I have a noise gate thrown on here, and you can see I have a gate. And let me go ahead and turn it off for a moment. So notice I turned it off, and this area is between the speaking. That's where I want it to go completely silent. But now when you throw on a gate, what it does is you set a threshold for what it allows to pass through as silence. See? So notice that? So the thing is, this works great for knocking out sections between words. You have to be careful of it because sometimes it'll, hit S's and P's, the tail ends of sentences. It can be a little aggressive. So this does work in a pinch, these noise gates. You can see what it's doing to the audio. So you just set your threshold and your attack and hold. And you and notice, but basically it punches out those those areas and makes them silent between words. So that's what we do. Richard K, thank you for your super chat. We really appreciate it. All right. Yes, go ahead.
Just real quickly, somebody asked hey, I don't see that link. Thanks for asking my question about generating proxy files, working with high-res files from Final Cut. I don't see the link. This is Edward. So Edward, I'm going to paste it in again right now in the chat window. That's the link I just pasted in, and you can go there to check it out.
Yeah. So Show G Production says, I use the record function in Zoom to record an interview, but it records at 25 FPS. I don't see any settings in Zoom to change to 24. I don't think there's a way to change it to 24. Do you, Trav? Mark, everything I've ever got back from it is always 25.
Yeah, and then I would work if you have to. I'd work in it's easier to go to from 24 to 25 than the other way around.
Yeah.
But either way is a little messy.
Yeah. And speaking of which, this might be a good place to jump into that one question I had relative to Zooms. It's a perfect segue. Is that let me see here, right at the top. Let me go ahead and state the question. Let's see here. It says recording a Zoom meeting created at an MP4 at 88 megabytes, 11 minutes. But when imported to Final Cut, it turned into an unedited. I can try like a 5.67 gigabyte, 1280 by 720. 25p file. If I export to file, it states at ProRes 422, but when I send a compressor, it seems to change to H.264, but still gives an output to Vimeo of 844 megs. How come, I think this is the essence of his question. How come that an original MP4 started at 88, but ends up at 844 megabytes just by spending a few seconds on the timeline? So let me talk about that, because I think that's a good question. There's a lot of people that have to deal with Zoom files. And how do you deal with that? So you can see here this is an hour Zoom meeting that I recorded a few months back for the Final Cut Summit. It's an hour, right? And without going to the Finder, I can tell you that this Zoom file, it's 25 frames per second, but it's about 136 megabytes. And so if I wanted, let's say I threw it into a timeline like I did now, and the only reason I want to do this is because I want to add some titles, I want to put some zooms, I want some call outs, I want to spice up my Zoom call video with a little bit more, bling. And so I'll bring in the Final Cut. But what this gentleman from Suffolk, England is lamenting is that when you go to export the file, if I go to master file, this is what he's referring to. If I go into settings, and even if I choose, and say video and audio, and I'm not going to choose ProRes. I'm going to choose H.264. Look at this. It's 9. It goes from 103 megabytes to 9 gigabytes. That's really the essence of his problem. So let's look at how to deal with this. By the way, you're never, I won't say never, that's a pretty strong word. It's highly unlikely you're going to be able to get this file to its original size of 136 megabytes. And one of the reasons is that all of the presets that are built into Compressor are optimized for the highest quality. In other words, they're a sweet spot between like the best data rates and, you know, the number of keyframes, and what Apple's trying to do is give you the best looking image possible. So let me go in. I actually have 2 of them in here. Basically what I did is I brought that entire timeline into Compressor, and then I applied a Vimeo preset. Notice it says up to 4K. And then I also applied a YouTube. I'm going to get rid of the YouTube preset just for now, just not confuse things. But I took this Vimeo preset, dropped it on there, and I went into the video settings tab. And right away you could see, well, let me set this to, well, under data rate. This is the most crucial setting of anything you could do in Compressor, because Final Cut will spit out a web publishing preset. So notice here it's 14,000 kilobits per second, and it's going to yield a file size of 7 gigabytes. Okay, and if I go to computer playback, it'll go up to 19,000 kilobytes, and now it's back at 9 gigabytes. Final Cut is giving you the maximum quality, which is why the file's so big. So if you want to squish this down to something more reasonable, you're going to want to choose custom and then enter a custom value in here. Now, typically for our tutorials, we work between 2,000 and 3,000 kilobits per second. Watch what happens when I put in 3,000 KB per second. Return. Look at the file size now. It's 1.53 gigabytes now. So firstly, I just want to point out that you're never going to get that file to its original size. Just forget about it, unless you maybe use Handbrake or something else. But Final Cut's presets are designed for maximum quality. And in this case, it went from 9 gigabytes to 1.5 gigabytes. I'm okay with that, as long as the quality meets my standards. I may get a little crunchiness in the transitions and whatnot, but I mean, I could live with a 1.5 gigabyte file. And what you want to do is experiment with that setting to get the sweet spot between file size and picture quality. It's always a trade-off. I just want to point out that Travis has got an excellent tutorial on working in Compressor, and we made it on sale for $29. It's regularly $49, and you can get it on our site. And this would be a good time to talk about it. So if you really want to dive into Compressor and we actually have an entire cookbook of compression recipes. Anybody is interested in this is like a must-have for, you know, getting your video like at the smallest possible footprint. So I just wanted, I knew this question was going to come up, so we wanted to make that available to you. So there you go. Back to you, Mark.
That was great. That was really, really great. Mm-hmm. I'm not seeing a lot of new questions. If you didn't get your question answered, please post it again. It's just hard to scroll through this thing to find if there's ones we missed. Mm-hmm. And of course, if you do make a small contribution, it pops up really big, and we'll grab those. But we'll do either way. But meanwhile, we do have some more of the questions that were asked in advance.
Yep.
Maybe this would be a good time to do a couple of the motion ones.
Absolutely. Let's dive into motion.
Okay. Actually, several different questions. One question was, how do I set a ground plane in motion for correct placement of graphics and track that plane so that graphics stick? So that is a really great question. And so I'm going to share my screen here, and I'm going to go to, not that one, I will just go to a new one. I really want to kind of create this from scratch really quickly to show you the basic idea here. So for a floor, I'm going to use a generator, and I'll just go to generators, and I'll add a color solid into my program, into my canvas here. I'll press Q for the Adjust 3D Transform tool, hold the Shift key down, and drag it so it rotates exactly 90 degrees. So that's totally flat right now. I'll also add a camera and switch to 3D. So now I can move this camera around. You can see there's my floor. I'm moving the camera. I'm not moving the floor. The floor is at exactly 0 in Y, which is key. Okay, so I'll move my camera like that. And now I can start adding some objects. So I'll add some text first. sorry, I changed I'm typing a little too fast, color background. And let's just make this text a little bigger. And the text anchor point is the bottom. So if I go to the inspector for that text, to its properties, and set its Y position to 0, it's going to be right on the floor. How can you tell? Let's add a light. And I'll add a light and bring it up and move it out a little bit and increase the intensity and turn on shadows. And now you can see that that text is flat on that floor and just stuck to it perfectly. If I add in I'll Command I to import some graphics, and let's just grab a few of these things. We don't need all of them, but I'll just grab them all. And I'll turn them all off first. You can select them all and turn them off all at once. So let's just turn on like this man here. So I've got this character, and the thing you can do here with this character, by the way, I'll hit Shift T just so we can see a transparent background, is you can use this little isolate tool that will just show that character, and then I can right click and choose the anchor point and move the anchor point just to the bottom of his feet. Okay, I'll hit that isolate button to put him back in the scene here and set his Y to 0. Since that anchor point's there, he's exactly touching that space, the floor. Here I've got a little football player, and the same kind of thing. You can isolate it, you can right click it, choose the anchor point tool, move that to the floor, and unisolate it and put his Y at 0. And the cool thing about this is once you've done that, it's 0. So I can scale him, and it's going to scale keeping his foot on the ground. So he'll always stay on the ground as I scale him. The other thing you can do, just another tool, and I'll leave it at that, but now he's right on the ground there, is if you go to your HUD, your heads-up display, this tool here, the third tool, will move an object sideways or back and forth in space, but not up and down in Y. So if you have many different objects on a floor like this, you can put them all on it and just use this tool to kind of place them in the scene without ever worrying about them lifting up off the floor or going down into the floor. Finally, let me just go to the top view, and I'll select that color solid, and we can make it much bigger just so it covers the whole scene there. And you can stretch it back and play it in space, what have you. I'll put my colored background back on. So that's just a quick idea of a couple of tools you can use for setting up scenes where you put objects on a floor in 3D space.
All right.
So, are you?
Yep.
Are you there,
yeah, I'm
buddy?
just looking at questions here. Thanks, Mark, for that. There's a couple of questions that came in. One, let's see here. Richard Davis, we did get your question about your renders being lost. Mark, do you ever render something, quit, come back, open Final Cut, and the render files are gone? I don't really experience that.
Yes.
Okay, go ahead.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Yes, I have, and yes, I see many people with that problem posting on various Facebook groups. It's not unusual to have that happen. I don't really have a solution for you about that, but many people have complained about that you open it back up and some render files are simply gone. Personally, I have background rendering turned off all the time. I don't background render ever. If there's something that most things I do don't need any rendering. Occasionally, like if I'm since I'm doing more with ProRes RAW now, when you shoot in ProRes RAW, you're bypassing the internal noise reduction of the camera, so you need to do your noise reduction in post. And Final Cut does have a noise reduction filter or effect. It's just not very controllable. So I use Neat Video, and that takes a lot of processing power. So that'll render individually on a clip-by-clip basis. But generally, I just don't render till I'm exporting.
Awesome. Thank you. Big Water, thank you for your super chat. Really appreciate it. Okay, let me back up a couple of questions here. I answered one earlier. Ken, I'm not seeing video encoding in Compressor 4.4 on RT. What am I doing wrong? Video encoding in Compressor. Oh,
I think he's talking about the tutorial.
the tutorial. You know what? I'll post it. Yeah, I was saying that we have a tutorial it's in the Final Cut section. It's not, the compressor doesn't have its own tab on our site. Hang on, let me just, so basically we have I just mentioned we have a compressor tutorial on sale, and that's where it is. That's where you'll find it. So thanks for that. D Creative Vision, I'm getting out of memory message when I try to optimize my clips or create a multicam clip. The library and footage are both playing back from an external SSD. Do you ever get out of memory issues, Mark?
I don't. I'd ask them how much memory they have, and I'd also ask if they're running in the Chrome browser. Big no-no. Don't run Chrome while you're running Final Cut. There's a memory leak issue. I don't know if that's still true, but that has been true for some time. Use Run Activity Monitor and check your memory usage. See what's going on there.
Travis back here's going, has that been my problem all this time? Google it. Good. Marcus Benelli, I occasionally need to speed up my voiceover in my projects. I find that Final Cut speed and pitch control rarely produce acceptable right. You're right. It creates a lot of transients and weirdness. I have to tell you, if you have Resolve, this goes back to a question someone asked, why do I need to Resolve? Because there are things that Resolve does that Final Cut doesn't. And one of them in Fairlight, they have this feature. What was it called again? It's called Elastic Wave. It's freaking amazing. I should do a Mac break just on Elastic Wave, because not only can you change the speed of the voiceover, the entire one, but you can select a range and say, speed up these 4 words or slow down these 5 words. You can get in and granularly chop up your voiceover and control the speed of the delivery. It's amazing.
Well, don't forget, preserves the pitch.
And it also preserves the pitch. Check out Elastic Wave in Fairlight, and if that's something you guys are interested in me showing, I'd be happy to do a demo on it, because it's cool and you don't need a plugin for it. All right, cool.
Well, speaking of that, Steve, it's just funny because I know one of the questions that we were asked earlier is, what are your 5 favorite plugins? And I'll tell you, two of my favorite plugins are Resolve and Motion. Because they extend the functionality of Final Cut in many ways, where you just need, if you need to do a quick scene cut detection, or you need something with tracking, just use Resolve as like a Swiss Army knife to jump in and do something quickly, even if you're not using it as a full color grading application or anything. It just kind of got all these great tools built into it.
Yeah, and I forgot to mention this too, so I should probably mention it now if you cut to my screen. Mark did a tutorial called Warp Speed Editing, and these are all of his like super amazing fast tips that he's learned, in the trenches over the past 10 years using Final Cut, and it's called Warp Speed Editing appropriately, and that's also on sale. It's normally $59. It's on $39 for you guys today, and I'll post that into the chat, and you can check that out. I just completely forgot about that. So there's that if you want to check out Mark's Warp Speed Editing tutorial.
Tom Wolski says actually uninstall Chrome. It doesn't even have to be running to cause that issue. Interesting.
Yeah, and it's
very interesting. Try.
And it's tracking you even if you're not around your computer. So they're just kidding you. All right. You have the same tool in Logic Pro. Okay, good. Yeah, that's true, Art. I agree. You do. I'm just so I'm using Fairlight more and more and more. I said this. I kind of went on a rant on the last RippleLIVE. Like, why would people use Logic Pro to use to send their stuff to Logic? Because in my mind, Logic is a music arrangement app. It's for music, and you can certainly do post in it. But I mean, if you think about all the plugins that Logic that gives you are built right into Final Cut, you can apply them right to your roles in Final Cut. I don't see any need to go to Logic. That's what I said last time. There may be like the occasional reason, like you said, there's a time shift feature in Logic, but I'm just I'm using I think more Fairlight more as an audio post tool in Logic as more of a audio music arrangement and composing tool. But that's how I categorize them into my mind. Okay. Cool. Yeah. Thanks, Bryce. It does. It tracks your dreams. All right.
Just to back up a little bit there, Lyndon Seymour says, how does that non-render workflow work with playback during your edits? So, Lyndon, for me, it plays perfectly. And my suggestion to you would be, while you're editing and doing basic things like transitions, titles, color correction, transforms, if you're not able to get full frame playback with those basic things, then you should be working with proxy footage, or you should be working with optimized footage. Neat video is a separate thing. Like, that's noise reduction. It's the last step. You can keep it turned off, and you'll need to render it. But if you're needing to render just on your regular workflow, you don't want to have to need to do that. That just completely gets in the way of an editing process, you know, if you're doing that. So either optimize or proxy, and which you do depends on too many factors to, you know, have to know a little bit more about what you're doing, because optimized media is going to take a lot more space, but may make sense to do. The thing that's happening right now, I find a lot of people are shooting, like with this A7S III, they're shooting 10-bit 422 video, and it's like, it's great that it does that, but it's really hard on a computer, especially the 422 part, but even the 10-bit part can really bog it down. And that's why you want to look at, in that case, like a proxy workflow, especially when you create the proxies in camera while you're shooting, and you waste no time creating proxies after the fact. So that just be my 2 cents, is you really want to get your workflow set up so that you can do basic editing and color correction and be able to play that back in real time.
Yeah. Okay, so I want to circle back to a couple of questions that we kind of missed earlier. I'm going back to our pre-submitted questions. One was dealing with legacy analog tape. Is there a streamlined way to capture footage from a tape into Final Cut 10? Or I have a 35-year archival library of SVHS, Beta SP, DVC Pro, everything in between. The early versions of 10 provided a way to capture, but Apple phased that out. What I do to access the library now, I use a version of Final Cut 7 and then import a .move into 10. But it works, it's cumbersome. Well, first of all, I want to make the statement, well, I want to correct something you said. You said that Final Cut doesn't do that anymore. That's not true. I took a screenshot. I haven't captured from tape in years, but here's a screenshot right from their manual. And it's showing you that you connect your camcorder. It's got to be a FireWire based camcorder. Remember FireWire? FireWire 400, FireWire 800. You have that connected to your camcorder. You click it, and your VCR/camera will show up in the cameras list. And you could play it, you could shuttle it, and when you click import, it starts capturing from wherever you started playback of that tape. So you definitely have a tape capture feature built into Final Cut. The question is, how do I get my legacy VHS? This has been something that I haven't done for a while, but you're going to need some sort of a box that will essentially do an A to D conversion. A lot of camcorders used to allow you to plug in your analog inputs, like your VHS, and then it does an A to D version in the camera and then spits it out the FireWire port. So that's something I've done. I'm sure I could do that with my Sony HDV camera, but it's been so long since I've tried it that I'd have to try it again. But you do have it built in. You have the ability to do it. Whether, how you get your legacy, analog stuff in there is, you're going to have to play with it. There may be a box on Amazon that you could buy, but maybe someone out there is already doing that. If you want to post that in the chat, let people know what you do to get your analog stuff into Final Cut. Awesome.
Okay. Great. Hey, we just got a question that actually ties to a question that was asked in our spreadsheet here. Yeah. Is it worth reminding folks who have been editing forever and never had a project corrupt where to find the backup Final Cut Pro project files? Mm-hmm. And I think that's an awesome thing to address. And I'll just show that real quickly. Mm-hmm. So here in my Final Cut, if you go under the File menu and choose Open Library, you can choose from backup, but you can't do it here because I don't have a library selected that I've backed up recently. So Library, File, Open Library, from Backup. So the point is, Final Cut is first of all, you never need to save in Final Cut. It's always saving your current project automatically. But it's also creating backups either every 15 minutes or when you've made a change. I mean, if you leave it alone for an hour or 2 hours, it's not going to do anything. But if you make a change every 15 minutes. So you can see here for this library, you can see I've got backups and I can go back in time. So if my library is corrupt, I can go back to an earlier one and grab it. If you click Other, it will take you to a folder of all your Final Cut backups. This is the default location in Home, Movies, Final Cut Backups. And another tip here is this folder can get really freaking big. after a while. So if you've got a lot of projects with a lot of backups, sometimes I go in and I delete a bunch of them. If I'm completely done with a project and I've backed it up already somewhere else, I'll delete all of these backups here, and it can really save some space. But the person who wrote in mentioned that they didn't even know that this existed, and they had a corrupt project, and they spent a few days struggling until they discovered this, and then they were back up and running, in 60 seconds. So they can really save you.
Yeah, and by the way, it looks like Bryce and Jord, I hope that I pronounced that correctly, Canopus and Elgato have boxes for A to D conversion. So thanks for posting that. That's really helpful. Okay. So Ely White, we do have a compressor tutorial. If you look earlier in the stream, I don't know if you came in a little bit late, but we have a compressor tutorial that's on sale that goes through complete workflow of the compressor that Travis did an excellent job on. And I'll just post that link in there for you. And I would definitely check that out. All right. Thanks, Tube Power, $20. Thank you. Thank you for that.
Thank you very much.
Super chat. All right. Awesome. Really good questions today. All right.
So one more of the motion demos?
Yeah, let me answer. There's an audio question that Lake Wind Studio asked, and I want to answer that.
Good one.
What's the best way to normalize audio in Final Cut? I always create a compound clip so that I can treat the dialogue, final sound effects, and music as a submix. But should I use a compressor or limiter on the overall submix? Well, there's a couple of different ways to approach that, and I should define some terms here. What he means by normalize is that typically you would have an audio file with the dynamics. In other words, the difference between the lowest sound and the highest sound all over the place, and you'd put you would normalize it. And by the way, Final Cut 7 used to have a normalize built into it, but Premiere, Resolve, they all have it. I feel like Apple should put a normalize feature in it, because what that does is it looks at the levels and you define a cap. You say, okay, normalize to this dB. So what it does is you can raise the volume, but the peak will never go over the amount or the threshold you set. So you don't have to worry about like distortion. I love the fact that you can normalize, but you can actually do that with a compressor. And you asked about that. One of the things, we use compressors all the time, but particularly the compressor that's built into Final Cut, it has a limiter built in. So you're essentially doing the same thing. With a compressor, you're essentially lowering the peaks, but raising the lowest parts. You're essentially doing this to the signal to make it fatter. But then you worry about those transients, those few spikes that will cause your video to clip. Right, I should just show you. Right at the side of the compressor, there actually is a built-in limiter. So if I just throw this on here, and let's see, where's the compressor? There it is. So I'm just going to throw that on there, and you'll see that when I bring up the UI, there's a limiter. It's right there on the side. So you can then turn this on, and then you could set the threshold, kind of what Normalize does. So you just set where you want the threshold to happen, and that you have it built in. So I don't miss the Normalize, because I do everything I need to do with the audio relative to keeping the sounds at the levels I want without clipping, using this tool right here. And by the way, Travis does a great job of covering that in his audio tutorial. So the question is, and there's a second part of his question: how should I apply that compressor limiter? What should I apply it? Should I take all my music effects and dialogue and then put them in a compound and apply that on top of it? No, that's not my workflow. That's one way you could do it, but I typically always think of normalizing in regard to the separate individual stems. So I'll compress and limit all of the dialogue. So like say I have two people talking in a scene, I'll put those into like a compound clip, or yeah, and then I will then apply a compressor to those two things. And so I'm always normalizing to each stem. I'll normalize the dialogue separate from the effects, separate from the music. Okay, so I want all of the different parts of my mix at the levels I want before I do a final mix. So I always think of normalizing the dialogue, because that's the most important thing. Usually music, when you get it, it's already been normalized, it's already been mixed to the proper levels. So I don't usually do that on a music mix. In sound effects, same way you could do that. You have things that are really loud and really soft, But usually that's what you want in a sound effect. You want those dynamics. So I typically think of normalizing for dialogue, not necessarily my other tracks. But that's how I think about it. All right. Long-winded answer. Great. I agree. Go ahead.
I just want to say thank you, Tony Mark, for your contribution. Very much appreciated. And then Peter Hitchcock, thank you very much as well. Peter has a question. Final Cut won't open with a large edit. It's 900 gigs due to grading.
What?
A smaller edit program will.
Wow.
So I have a bunch of questions about that. Like, wow. I don't understand what you mean due to grading. The grading doesn't increase the size of your Final Cut library or of the media that it contains. So I'd want to know a little bit about, is the media in the library? Is it external? Are you optimizing media? Are you creating proxy media? But if you can't actually open it, one option would be try to open one of the backups that we were talking about earlier. Go to one of the backups and see if that will open.
Hey Mark, I just want to let you know you're under wide view.
It's all right.
Oh yeah, I know. Okay, sorry.
It was a cool
I'm just
cool
showing
shot.
up. I have a wide view, and I used Travis's tutorial to put my iPhone using Filmic Pro connected to the ATEM to do that. Anyway,
that's great.
Yeah, so being able to open that, I go to the backups and look at one of those, and it could be you have. I'd be also interested in how much memory you have on your system. It just could be so big that you need to shut all your other applications, make sure Chrome's not running, or maybe uninstall Chrome, and see if you can then open it. But it shouldn't. That's a big. Again, 900 gigs is what? Like, it's not unusual to have a terabyte of footage. I have multiple libraries open right now. I have a dozen libraries open right now, and each one of them has almost a terabyte of footage in them. That's not unusual. And in fact, it's all internal. I actually prefer, when I'm finishing up a project, to move everything inside the library just so I know it's all there. I'm not missing anything. So I'm sorry, I'm not able to give you a really good answer without knowing more about your system and exactly have everything set up. But going to the backups is one option. Don Walker, thank you very much.
Yep. Thanks, Tom. And Peter, thank you, Peter. And Don. So, great.
And the question about the LUFS meter, I believe the multimeter in Final Cut has a LUFS.
Yeah, it's been
on it.
Yeah, it's fact. Most people don't even know this is in here. But if here, I'm going to just take this multimeter here. It's called the multimeter. You just throw it on here, and if I open it up, look at this. There's actually a LUFS peak monitor here, so you can actually monitor LUFS using
the audio ring up, and then the really loud.
You can see here that I'm running coming out as like minus 19 LUFS right here. So people are shocked when they say that's always been in Final Cut. Yeah, it's been there because it's a Logic plugin. So to my point earlier, I don't need to go to Logic. I have what I need right here in Final Cut. So awesome. All right, so I don't know, Art, I think you're saying plugin normalizes sound for broadcasting. I don't know a plugin that will do that automatically. Someone out there knows of a LUFS plugin, just post that there for Art. Okay.
Maybe I should do this little motion thing.
Sure, go ahead. Do that little motion thing.
Do a little motion thing. So the question is there how can I animate the opacity of an object in motion to make it fade in and out randomly over some period of time, or is there a better way to achieve that result? I'd like both the frequency and opacity to vary randomly. And you can definitely do that. Here I am in motion, and I have a light bulb graphic. And you can select the object or the group. I'll select the group in this case. I'll go to its properties, and I want to vary its opacity. So we see the opacity parameter right here, opacity. I'm going to click this downward facing arrow and choose add parameter behavior. And I can either choose randomize or wriggle. They're similar. Randomize is a little more random than wriggle. You could try either one. So I'll click randomize, and then I'll set the amount here to minus 100% because we're already at 100% opacity. And I'm going to add that. So now if I play, we've got this blinking on and off just like that. and we can adjust the frequency of how often it does that, and the noisiness, which introduces more randomness into it. But really, if you also want this frequency to be random, this is what's so freaking cool about motion is these parameter behaviors. So I used a parameter behavior to randomize the opacity of that light bulb, but then I can randomize the frequency as well. So I can click the downward facing arrow next to frequency and choose add parameter behavior. And maybe this time I'll choose wriggle. Okay, and now I'm going to wriggle. I can choose how much to wriggle that frequency to get a much more random kind of behavior. And then I just added a little light rays effect to see if that would be interesting. This is another option, is using light rays. So pretty much any parameter, not just opacity, but color and blur amount, etc., can be animated with these parameter behaviors. Are super powerful, and you can add them on top of each other.
Awesome. Thanks, Mark.
That's all I have to say about that.
So I want to remind everybody, I'm going back to the questions. We're not deliberately trying to ignore your questions. There's just a lot of, we're going back between our spreadsheet and this. So if you have a question that really needs to be answered, please, put it back in there and we'll look at it again. So again, we're doing our best to try to get to all of them. So, yeah, awesome. Thanks, Kurt. Thanks, Movie Temp. Awesome. There was a question earlier that I wanted to kind of circle back to, but yeah. Yeah, so D. Voody asked opinion on the work between Sony FX6 and Final Cut Pro. I'm just about to buy one. Is that FX6 the new cinema camera that's based on the A7S III?
No,
that's
that's the FX3.
Right.
That's the FX3, and that's the most illogical camera I've ever seen. I don't understand that camera. But the FX6 is a great camera.
So does it work in Final Cut?
Sure, the FX6 works fine in Final Cut.
So do you go buy it? Go buy the camera right now. You should buy it.
Great camera. Yeah. Great camera.
Awesome. So
there's a Rajan is asking, is there a way to back up the library with only used media? And the answer is yes and no. You can create, what I like to do is create a separate library that includes all the media that was used in your project. And you can do that simply by dragging create a brand new library and drag your finished project from your existing library into an event in that new library. And it will take with it all the media that was used in that project, and then you consolidate. And then that library is just the media used in that timeline. Now, it's the entire clip of every clip used in the timeline. So if that timeline includes 3 seconds of a 1 hour clip, the whole 1 hour clip is going to be included, which you may not want. But these days, with space being so cheap, it's a good way to go. And then you can delete your other library, and you've got a library with just the media. If you really want to have just the media used in that timeline without any extra amount or just a little bit of handles, send an XML to Resolve. Again, Resolve can do a media management where it trims the media, and you can create a trimmed set there and send it back to Final Cut. So that's just another option if you want to use Resolve in that kind of Swiss Army tool kind of way.
Yeah. So there was a couple of other questions I wanted to get to that I call the outliers. One of them says, noob question. Whenever I edit a clip, I feel like I'm clicking too many times. I click once to move the playhead over the clip so I can see in the viewer. Then I click again to select the clip so I can make my edit. Is there a way to click once to select the clip and move the playhead? Please save my trackpad from a gruesome death. Oh, I love it. Let's see here. I'm going to jump over to one of my... I'm trying to find something that has individual cuts. I don't have one of my libraries open that I need to. Hang on 1 second. Here we go. Let's try this. There we go. Key Largo. All right. Open this up. So what he's saying is, okay, how do I get the playhead and the clip to be selected at the same time? Well, let's check this out. I'm going to move my mouse pointer over here, hold down the Option key, and click. The playhead moves to the point where I click and selects it all in one fell swoop. Aren't you glad you watched? There you go. So Thank you for that question. All right, someone asked in the chat and also in our pre-selected question, the best way to reverse text in motion. So it's come up twice, Mark, if you want to cover like how to reverse text.
Okay, 1 second. I'm sorry. I'm just trying to test something else. So I don't know what they mean by reverse text. If they want each letter to be in a backwards order, I don't know directly of a way to do that. One thing you can do is rotate the text 180 degrees on the y-axis, and that'll reverse the text. It'll be backwards. There's also if you use the sequence text behavior, you can randomize the text so it'll be completely random, but I'm not sure you can reverse it with that. I'd have to look at that and see if there's a way that will just do exactly reorder the text letters so they're still facing the same direction but are back to front. It might be. So I would look at the sequence text behavior, the randomized for that. While we're answering questions, I'll dig in and see if there's some demo I can do on that.
So there's a question that came in about hardware and control surfaces. Have you used LoupeDeck control surface Final Cut? Would you recommend it? I'm trying to, obviously I can't comment on something never used. Certainly it looks like an awesome piece of hardware. I'm trying to get them to send me one. So I'd like to be able to cover it. It seems to be popular. I'm sure a lot of you out there use it and have great things to say about it, but I don't. So that's something I'm looking at. So there was a question also too, was asked about RAID, Mark. I don't know if you want to take this one. You're using a RAID 4 versus 5.
Oh yeah. Okay, let me read it. I'm using a RAID with 4 1 terabyte SSD drives. I've always used them at striped 0. Now I'm reading with dads use striped 5. Dads use striped 5. I'm not sure what that means exactly.
His dad's drive is striped 5, I guess.
Well, let's say that's what it is. But they're major differences. When you're striped 0, you're basically taking all those drives and making one drive out of them that's super fast. So RAID 0, think of it as being very fast and very dangerous. So that's it. That's your souped up muscle car that's got no weight in the back and can spin out real easily, because you're going to get great performance, but if something goes wrong with any one of those drives, you will lose all of your data, just gone. I don't know anybody who stripes RAID 0 anymore because SSDs are so darn fast now. There's no reason to do that. That was back when you had a couple of hard drives that are slower and you needed to get more speed out of them. But generally what RAID 5 does, and that's what you use on something. Promise RAIDs are RAID 5 by default. If you've got multiple, in fact, I have a Promise RAID here that's all hard drives. And what RAID 5 does, it gives you a combination between extra speed, but also redundancy. So in a RAID 5 configuration, if any one drive fails, your data is still complete. You need to take that drive out and put it back in and rebuild the, you basically synchronize all those drives. So you basically rebuild the database, but all your data is still okay. So with RAID 5, you can lose a drive and you get some speed improvement. You'll also lose the amount of space. Like if you have 4 drives in your RAID 5, the total storage space really drops to 3 because it's using redundancy of that one drive. There's other options where you can use mirroring and you can do just a bunch of disks, but those are sort of the common ones. But RAID 5, I think, is the way you want to go these days with, with something like a Promise RAID or any kind of RAID box.
Right. So we're, I don't know, about 6 minutes out from the end of the show. Now's the time to ask any last minute questions. Probably going to end in about 6 minutes because it's lunchtime here on the West Coast. So just going through to see if we missed any that we want to cover really quick.
Thank you very much, Bob. Anybody, Bob's give a contribution, very much appreciated. Seeing here, please tell Apple to make keywords searchable. Yeah, I guess that would make sense. I just tested. They're definitely not searchable. I've never thought about searching on keywords, but I guess if you have a whole lot of keywords, that could.
My understanding, I don't know, did we have this discussion, and maybe Tom Wolski can pipe in? I just recall a time where you could search keywords. I mean, like keyword ranges.
Yeah, I just selected an event in a library and tried to search. I know on the word that is in one of my keyword collections, and it didn't come up.
Smart collection keywords.
Okay. So Mark, what app are you using to highlight
your?
Oh,
sure. So let me. I'll actually show that. So let me go back to my screen. That should be my screen, and let me go up here, and you can see it's called Pro Mouse. And what's really cool about this, besides if you hold the function key down, it does this big thing, which is configurable. If you hold the control key down, you can make it do this kind of highlight thing. And if you hold the option key down, you can draw on the screen. And Command Z will undo that. So I just started using this. The reason I got this is because if you're doing zoom, some cursor size increasers, I don't know what you want to call them, don't pass through to zoom. So you think, we just did a class last week where the teacher had a big cursor, but nobody could see it. But this one supposedly will work with the zoom. I don't know yet, but I was told that that does that. But I love this thing. It seems to work pretty well. So it's called Pro. What was it again? Pro Mouse, and it's on the App Store, and it's like $5. So it seems like a good investment.
All right.
A question from Brazil. Post away. Don't ask. Just post away. We'll answer it if we can. Yeah. You just wasted your.
All right. I think.
Taz.
Yeah, Taz. Oh, Taz is in the house.
Here.
Everyone,
right.
Taz is in the house.
Good to see you, man. Very good to see you. Handheld Hollywood, everybody. Go to handheldhollywood.com. It's great information if you're doing mobile filmmaking. Highly recommended.
Still on your UI, Mark.
Mark, we're still on your UI.
Here you go. Sorry. Or here, I'll do the wide shot.
Well, someone really asked me, yeah, like someone liked that shot that someone posted, I think, about wanting to see what's in our camera bag. So many YouTubers had like, what's in my camera bag? No, I thought about doing it, but we could do that, but I don't know how many people would be interested in what's in our camera bag.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Can you advise M1 Mac for Final Cut in Motion these days? So I definitely think if you need to buy a computer today, I would get, if you have to buy one today, I would get either the Mac Mini or the MacBook, the 13-inch MacBook Pro that's M1 and with 16 gigs of RAM. If you can wait, I would wait because those machines are so exciting and so powerful, and they're entry-level machines. I just can't wait to see a 16-inch MacBook Pro. The problem is the screen size on that 13-inch is just, for me, it's just not big enough. I know you can put an external monitor into it, but I can't wait to see the next generation on the Pro models with that M1 or the M1X or whatever's coming next for those. But I probably, if you have to get something now, I'd probably get one of those rather than like an Intel-based iMac, just because, man, oh man.
There's also one question that someone posted about, and it was 3 words, but it got me thinking. And the question was storytelling through editing, which is a big subject. Maybe if that's something that you might be interested, like how we approach editing a video. How do we get to the kernel of the story? And obviously that's a different answer depending on the nature of what you're cutting, a commercial or a documentary or some sort of a promo. So that answer is somewhat a variant, but I think there's some general storytelling principles that we can discuss. So if that's something you might be interested in, Mark and I, we want to discuss it, but that was kind of the topic. The canvas for that question was a little bit too wide at this point. So just want to let you know we got the question. We're mulching on it at this moment. Okay. So anything else, Mark?
No, I'm just reading through these to see if we could do a quick answer. I know we're kind of at the end of our time here. David Mathis, thank you very much for your contribution. Yeah, I think that's it. I think we got through most of the questions that we wanted to in the people who submitted them. If we didn't get to your question, we'll do another one of these. We'll do it again. We'll try to do them a little more frequently now that I was out of the country for a while, but now that we're local and we can do this, we should do it a little more frequently.
So if you bought a 2019 Mac Pro, that's
what what about if you bought a 2019 MacBook Pro?
I have one.
I'm right in the. I have one too.
I have one. We all have one.
Yeah,
I'm not.
Yeah.
Why? It works great.
No, I love this machine's great. It works great. I have no issues with it. The one thing that happens is people have something that works great, and something new comes out that's amazing, and they forget that what they have works great. You don't have to. You don't have to do anything. Like when these new, I'm assuming though at some point there'll be a new 16-inch MacBook Pro with an M1 chip. I may consider it at that point, but right now this machine does absolutely everything I need it to do. So I'm happy camper.
Yeah, me too. Although on Travis's machine, it's like, we're definitely in the market for M1. We're waiting. I'm waiting for the next generation, and it's got to be an announcement in the next few months, I would think. So, just waiting. I think that's the direction Apple's going, and I'm excited for possible. I have no idea. New iMacs. I'm just gonna wait. All right.
Alrighty.
So, looks like that brings us to a close for today. I just wanted to thank everybody. We know your time's valuable, and we appreciate you hanging out with us for an hour and a half and actually subscribing to our channel, engaging. If you comment on anything, buy a tutorial, we really appreciate it. We don't take you guys for granted. We can't do what we do without you, so thank you for that. It is Thursday, so we're heading to the weekend. I hope you all have an amazing, amazing weekend. And so Mark, look for Mark's new Mac break that's coming out on the ProRes workflow with his A7, and that's going to be something I'm really looking forward to. And please continue to give us comments and feedback on our YouTube channel, what you'd like to see. We do listen. One of the things I mentioned in the last Mac break was that, we heard you about the motion tutorials in under 60 being way too fast. And so we're going to slow it down a bit, and we're going to move the motion into a little bit more of a slowed down format. But we're going to continue the 60 quick tip. People love those, especially with Final Cut and some little quick thing you didn't know how to do. So we're going to continue those. We're just going to slow motion down a bit. That's all.
Awesome. Thank you everybody for joining us.
Yes. Thanks again. And we'll see you soon. Thanks. Have a great weekend.